Here is the part that stays with you. The crowd reacts before the referees do. It is June 24, 2026, inside Gainbridge Fieldhouse in Indianapolis. There are 6 minutes and 52 seconds left in the second quarter. The Fever and the Mercury are trading baskets in a game Phoenix will eventually win by 2, 111 to 109. And down near the paint, a loose ball squirts free. Caitlin Clark goes after it. She drives, she stumbles, and she ends up on the floor at the bottom of a pile. 3 Phoenix players collapse on top of her, all of them fighting for the same ball. One of those players is Alyssa Thomas. And somewhere inside that tangle of bodies, on a replay the whole world would study by the next morning, Thomas's fist drives up into Caitlin Clark's throat. No whistle. No flag. No stoppage. Thomas pushes herself up off the pile, steps back into the play, and the game keeps rolling like nothing happened at all. Now here is the question that turned 1 second of basketball into a week of national argument. How does contact like that, right in front of 3 trained officials standing a few feet away, go completely uncalled in real time? And then, a full day later, how does the league office look at that same footage and reach a completely different verdict? What follows is the whole story. The missed call. The coach who stood at a podium and refused to stay quiet. The suspension that came a day too late to help anybody. And a fallout nobody saw coming, one that turned this from a basketball story into something a lot uglier. Stay with me because by the end of this, the simple version you saw in a viral clip is going to look a lot more complicated than it did at first. But before we get into it, let's see if you were really watching that night. Quick quiz. When Caitlin Clark left this game and then missed Indiana's next one, what injury was she dealing with? Was it A, an ankle, B, a shoulder, C, her back, or D, a wrist? Drop your answer in the comments right now, and I'll tell you if you got it later in the video. Take a second. Lock it in. Alright. Let's rewind and go through this the way it actually unfolded, minute by minute. Let me set the table, because context matters here. These 2 teams did not like each other coming into that night, and that is not me editorializing. 2 nights earlier, the same Fever and the same Mercury had played a game so chippy that officials handed out 6 technical fouls and threw 1 player out entirely. Caitlin Clark picked up her 5th technical of the season in that game. She said afterward she got one of them for clapping. Her exact words to reporters were that if a technical should be rescinded, it should be that one, and that in her view the referee just did not like competitive basketball. So the temperature was already high. Everybody in that building on the 24th knew what had happened 48 hours before. Keep that in your back pocket, because Clark's own coach comes back to it hard later. Now, the play itself. 6:52, second quarter. Clark drives toward the lane chasing that loose ball. She loses her footing and goes down. 3 Mercury players, Thomas among them, dive onto the ball, which means they dive onto the area where Clark is already lying on the hardwood. Bodies pile up. And in the scramble, Thomas's closed fist ends up pressed into Clark's neck before Thomas lifts herself out of the pile and jogs back up the floor. Watch it at full speed and I will be honest with you, it is easy to miss. It looks like a loose ball scrum, the kind you see a dozen times a game. Watch it frame by frame, slowed all the way down, and it looks like something else entirely. And that gap, between what it looks like at full speed and what it looks like frozen, is the whole story. Hold that thought, because it is going to explain almost everything about how this played out. In real time, nobody stopped the game. Not the official trailing the play. Not either official along the baseline. The ball stayed live, the clock kept running, and the benches barely flinched, because in the moment it registered as ordinary contact in a crowded paint. The Associated Press later confirmed the timestamp and confirmed the plain fact of it. No foul was called on the play by the officials on the floor. But the cameras caught it. Of course they did. There are more lenses on a Caitlin Clark game than on almost any other matchup in this league, and within minutes clips were already spreading online. People watching at home, frame by frame, could see something the 3 officials on the floor apparently did not. That is not a small thing to sit with. The people whose entire job is to see exactly this kind of contact and stop play, they were the ones who missed it, and a fan on a couch 2,000 miles away caught it on the second replay. So let's actually answer the question instead of just asking it over and over. because it deserves a real answer. How do 3 officials miss a fist to the throat? Part of it is honestly just the nature of the job. Basketball is a sport of constant, overlapping, physical contact, and officials are trained to filter the incidental from the dangerous in a fraction of a second. That filtering exists for a good reason. If they blew the whistle on every brush of an arm and every tangle of legs, the game would be unwatchable. It would never flow. Here is the problem. On this play there were 3 bodies stacked on top of each other. Each official had exactly 1 angle, 1 vantage point, and no ability to pause or rewind. From certain positions, a fist buried inside a pile of players is genuinely blocked from view. You cannot call what you physically cannot see. That is the charitable read, and I think it is partly true. But here is where the charitable read runs out. When the league office reviewed this the next day, they did not have a fraction of a second. They had multiple camera angles, a slow motion button, a rewind button, and an entire night with 0 time pressure. And with all of that, they reached a very different conclusion than the one reached live. So there are really only 2 possibilities. Either all 3 officials genuinely could not see it in the moment, which is plausible in a pile like that, or they saw contact and judged, right then, that it did not rise to the level of a foul. Both of those are uncomfortable, and we honestly do not know which one it was, because officials do not sit for post-game interviews explaining their non-calls. That uncertainty is real, and I am not going to pretend I can read their minds. What we can say is this. The gap between what the cameras recorded and what the referees called became the entire story before the final buzzer even sounded. And it fed straight into an argument that has followed Caitlin Clark since the day she walked into this league. Clark, for her part, kept playing. She did not run to the locker room. She did not immediately wave to the bench. The game moved on around her. But her head coach did not move on. And this is where the story stops being a quiet no-call and becomes national news. Stephanie White walked into her post-game press conference and did not soften a single word. Now here is a detail that gives her comments extra weight, and I want you to hang on to it, because it comes back around in a way you will not expect. Stephanie White used to coach Alyssa Thomas. White was Thomas's head coach with the Connecticut Sun in 2023 and 2024. So this is not some outsider taking a shot at a stranger. This is a coach talking about a player she knows well. Here is what White said about the play. Quote, "The fist on the throat. It's crazy. It's crazy. It's dangerous." End quote. She said it plainly, and she said crazy twice, the way people do when they are genuinely rattled by something. Then she went further. She pointed out that this was not even the only cheap shot she saw that night. There was a second play, a landing space foul shortly after the Thomas incident, where Clark came down awkwardly on a jump shot and appeared to hurt her back. White put the 2 together. Quote, "We have a generational talent and a WNBA superstar who had 2 cheap shots right there that weren't called, and I just say again, absolutely unacceptable." End quote. And then she said the thing that turned this into a league-wide conversation, because she called the no-call itself, and I am quoting her directly here, "absolutely egregious and utterly disrespectful." Coaches do not usually talk like this about their own league's officiating. They know it can get them fined. They know it invites scrutiny. White did it anyway, on the record, into a bank of cameras. But the part of her press conference that mattered most was not the outrage. It was the pattern she pointed to. White told reporters, quote, "We spent all off-season looking at officiating. All off-season. And I still say the one thing that we keep asking for is consistency. She is not called the same way everybody else is called." End quote. Sit with that, because White is not just some frustrated fan. She served on the league's officiating task force, the group put together specifically to study exactly this problem. So when the person who sat in those meetings stands up months later and says the results are egregious, that tells you the gap between what the task force promised and what is happening on the floor is still wide open. A day or two later, White circled back and added a piece I think is the sharpest thing anybody said in this whole saga. She said she was surprised by the play, but that she was more surprised nothing got called during the game. Her point was simple. Quote, "I think the biggest thing for me is that we have to see it in real time." End quote. She said she was thankful the league went back and reviewed it, but that these are the things you cannot miss while they are happening. Because a review after the fact does not unring the bell. That is the whole tension of this story in one sentence, and it came from Clark's own coach. The morning after, the league office did the thing the three officials had not done in real time. It looked closely, frame by frame, at what happened to Caitlin Clark's throat. And what it found was enough to act on a full day after the final horn. The WNBA is allowed to do this. Under the rules, the league can go back and review a game to reclassify a flagrant foul, or to classify as flagrant any foul that was not called during the game. That is the mechanism, and it exists across pro basketball. Here is what they announced. Quote, from the official league release. Upon post-game review, the Phoenix Mercury's Alyssa Thomas has received a flagrant foul 2 penalty and a 1-game suspension for recklessly making contact with her fist to the throat area of Indiana Fever guard Caitlin Clark. End quote. Let me translate the important words there. A flagrant foul 2 is the most serious foul classification in the sport. It is reserved for contact judged to be unnecessary and excessive. The league also described what Thomas did as a non-basketball act, which is the specific language they use when they decide contact had nothing to do with a legitimate basketball play. And the word they leaned on was reckless. Not incidental. Not accidental in their framing. Reckless. The penalty followed fast. A 1-game suspension plus a $1,000 fine. Thomas served that suspension on June 27, when the Mercury traveled to face the Toronto Tempo. And the Fever organization responded, but responded carefully. Team president Kelly Krauskopf put out a short statement. Quote, player safety should be paramount in our league. We appreciate the WNBA's review of last night's incident and the action taken. Right now our focus is on Caitlin and our entire team. End quote. Notice they did not ask for anything more. They just restated the thing that should not have needed restating. Now, here is the strange part, and I want to be fair about it. The punishment exists. The word reckless exists, printed in an official league document anybody can read. And none of it changed what happened on the floor that night. The no call stood. The final score stood. Phoenix kept the win. Clark's body absorbed the contact in real time. And the only thing that arrived afterward was, functionally, a piece of paper and a 1-game absence for the other player. That is the mechanism this league has built for itself. Officiate live, and if you miss something, rely on an after-the-fact process to correct the record once the moment has already passed into history. It protects the record book. It does not protect the player. And it raises a question the league keeps having to answer. What good is a system that catches dangerous contact only after the danger has already happened? Let's get to the quiz answer, because it matters more than a trivia question. If you said C, her back, you were right. And here is why that answer is not just trivia. Caitlin Clark finished that game with 19 points and 8 assists. On paper, that looks like a productive night. But she put up those numbers in only 20 minutes, because she was pulled well before the end with a back issue that had been building through the game. Here is the sequence, and the timeline is what makes it uncomfortable. Not long after the throat contact went unpunished, Clark went up for a 3-point shot and came down awkwardly on that landing space foul we mentioned. The second play White was so angry about. She fell to the floor and got up rubbing her back. Earlier in the game she had already gone back toward the tunnel and returned to the bench wearing a wrap around her back for support. She left in the third quarter with the back problem, and she was ruled out of Indiana's next game entirely, a home matchup against Los Angeles. Now let me be careful and honest with you here, because this is where a lot of videos overreach. We do not actually know that the back injury was caused by the fist to the throat. Those were 2 separate plays. The reporting is clear that the back issue is tied to the awkward landing on the jump shot, not directly to the Thomas contact. So I am not going to tell you Alyssa Thomas injured Caitlin Clark's back, because the evidence does not support that, and you should be suspicious of anybody who tells you it flatly does. What the reporting does support is this. In a single half, against the same opponent, Caitlin Clark was involved in 2 uncalled physical plays, and she left that game hurt and missed the next one. You can decide for yourself how much of a coincidence that is. I just want you making that decision with the real facts and not with a version somebody juiced up for clicks. The cost is real either way. For a franchise whose ticket sales and TV ratings and national attention are tied more tightly to one player than maybe any team in the league, a missed game is not just a basketball decision. It is lost revenue, lost momentum, and one more reminder that the league's biggest draw keeps ending up on the wrong end of contact the officials keep missing live. And there is a quieter cost underneath all of it. Clark's first 3 pro seasons have already included recurring lower body and back trouble that has cost her stretches of playing time. She is in year 3 of a career that should still be climbing toward its peak. Every game she sits with something connected, even indirectly, to physical contact is development time she does not get back. A suspension issued 3 days later cannot return a missed game. It cannot undo the wear. By the time the paperwork lands, the body has already taken what the whistle was supposed to prevent. Here is the argument you have heard 100 times if you follow this league. That Caitlin Clark gets hit more than anyone, and that the officials keep missing it. So let's actually test it instead of just repeating it, because it is more complicated than a slogan. The case that it is a pattern is real, and it is built on more than this one night. This was not the first time the league has gone back after the fact to upgrade a foul involving Clark. Last season, Marina Mabrey, then with Connecticut, was given only a technical foul in a game against Indiana. The league later reviewed it and upgraded it all the way to a flagrant 2. Go back to Clark's rookie season and there was the DeJohnai Carrington eye poke during a playoff game, another moment that got relitigated after the fact. And now this. 3 separate seasons, 3 separate times the league has looked back at contact involving the same player and decided, only in hindsight, that it was more serious than the original call. Add in the 2 nights before, the 6 technicals, the ejection, Clark's 5th tech of the year, and you have a genuine argument that the games around this one player run hotter than almost any others in the league, and that the officiating has not kept up. But now let me give you the other side, because a fair investigation gives you both, and the other side is stronger than the outrage version wants to admit. First, physical does not automatically mean targeted. This is a physical league, and Alyssa Thomas in particular has a reputation, earned over more than a decade, as one of the most physical players in the sport. That is not a Caitlin Clark thing. That is a how Alyssa Thomas has always played thing. Second, and this is important, when Clark got tangled up in a scrum last season with Connecticut players, one of her own teammates, Sophie Cunningham, delivered a hard retaliatory foul, got a flagrant 2 and a fine for it, and got praised by a chunk of the fanbase as Clark's enforcer. So the physicality around these games runs in more than one direction, and the same fans do not always apply the same standard to it. And third, here is the fact that complicates the clean story the most. Alyssa Thomas says she did not do it on purpose. And a lot of basketball people agree with her. We are going to spend real time on that next, because it is the part the viral clips almost never show you. So is it a pattern? There is a genuine case that Clark absorbs a disproportionate share of contact and gets a review after the fact more than anyone else. There is an equally genuine case that this specific play was a scramble that got frozen into something it may not have been in the moment. Both of those can be true at the same time. Anybody selling you only one of them is selling you half the story. Because here is what happened after the suspension, and it is the reason the tone of this whole video has to shift. Alyssa Thomas broke her silence a few days later, and the first thing she said was that it was an accident. Quote, "There's a difference between trolling and there's a difference between hatred, and the hatred that we're experiencing over a play that honestly was a complete accident." End quote. She said that a lot of players, herself included, did not even know the play had happened until after the game was over. And what she described experiencing since is genuinely disturbing. Thomas, who is 34 years old, said that she and her family had received death threats. That she had been targeted with racial slurs. That she and her teammates were being, in her words, painted as thugs. Let that land for a second. Whatever you think of the foul, a person is getting threats on her life over a loose ball scramble in a basketball game. She also took direct aim at the commissioner. Quote, "We still have yet to hear anything from Kathy. It's no surprise. As usual, she remains silent, and that's unfortunate when our lives are being threatened." End quote. Her point was that the league moves fast to talk about protecting players on the court and moves slowly when players are getting threatened off it. Hours after that, Commissioner Kathy Engelbert did respond. Quote, "The WNBA vehemently condemns any and all forms of hate. The safety and well-being of everyone in our community is always the league's top priority. We are aware of Alyssa Thomas's comments, and what she and her teammates have experienced is completely unacceptable and not representative of the WNBA community. End quote. And Thomas was not out there alone. Players around the league defended her. Veteran guard Sydney Colson, who has actually played with Clark, said flatly that she did not think the play was a flagrant 2. Her exact words, quote, "Do I think it was a flagrant 2? Not at all. But I also grew up in an era where it's very physical, and this was the least of what I would consider a flagrant 2. End quote. Chiney Aguamike sided with Thomas too. And Phoenix's head coach, Nate Tibbetts, went after the process itself. He called the league's review not thorough and extremely disappointing. He pushed back hard on White's cheap shots language, calling the idea that there were 2 cheap shots in that game, quote, ridiculous. And he made an argument I think you should hear in full, because it is the single most reasonable thing anybody said the entire week. Tibbetts said, quote, "I hope that we can all agree that consistency is the main thing in how we call these games. Let's not base it on generational talent, fan base involvement, all-star level players or role players. Let's not base it off veterans or young players, or white players or black players, or international players. If this is the standard, make this the standard, even if the roles were reversed in this situation." End quote. That is a hard point to argue with. He is not saying nothing happened. He is saying whatever the standard is, apply it to everybody the same, no matter who is involved and no matter which player would benefit. Now here is the twist I told you to hang on to. Remember that Stephanie White, the coach who called this egregious and disrespectful, used to coach Alyssa Thomas. A few days after her furious post-game press conference, White stood up again. And this time she was not talking about the foul. She was talking about what was being done to Thomas. And she condemned it, completely. White opened a press conference specifically to address the harassment Thomas was getting. She said, quote, "I think as a league, as a whole, there's been so much more toxicity, racism, homophobia, straight-out nonsense, and it is absolutely unacceptable." End quote. She went on to talk about the league being about inclusiveness and about elevating women and marginalized communities. Think about what that means. The coach who was angriest about the play, the coach who fights for Caitlin Clark every single night, looked at what the internet was doing to the other player and said, in effect, "This has gone way too far, and I will not be part of it." That is the whole thing right there. You can believe the no call was bad. You can believe Clark gets officiated inconsistently. You can be a Caitlin Clark fan through and through. And you can still look at death threats and racial slurs aimed at another woman over a basketball play and say, absolutely not in my name. Those positions are not in conflict. Stephanie White held all of them at once, and she is closer to this than any of us. The Chicago Sun-Times put its finger on the deeper pattern underneath all of it. That there is a recurring problem in this league where black players, in particular, face a wave of harassment when they are seen as standing opposite Clark. And that is bigger than one foul, one suspension, or one game. That is a thing the league is going to have to reckon with whether it wants to or not. So let's pull all the way back, because this stopped being about 1 second of basketball a long time ago. The WNBA's visibility has exploded since Caitlin Clark arrived in 2024. Bigger TV audiences, bigger arenas, more scrutiny than this league has ever had. And that scrutiny cuts in every direction at once. It means every missed call gets frozen, zoomed, and dissected by millions of people within minutes. A play that 15 years ago would have died in a box score nobody outside the building ever read now becomes a national argument before the players have even showered. That visibility is exactly why the officiating question is so loud. When one player is that magnified, every no call involving her becomes evidence in a case people were already arguing. And there is a real, legitimate debate here. Is Clark officiated differently than everyone else, as her coach insists? Or is she simply the most watched player in a physical league, which means her contact gets more attention than anyone else's, even when the contact itself is ordinary? Reasonable, informed basketball people land on opposite sides of that. I am not going to pretend it is settled, because it is not. But that same visibility is why the ugliness got so bad so fast. The bigger the spotlight, the bigger the mob that forms when a play goes viral, and the more a real human being on the wrong end of it gets buried under threats. That is the cost nobody puts in a thumbnail. Caitlin Clark's rise has been genuinely great for this league. And one of the side effects of that rise is that the people who end up cast as her villain, fairly or not, are getting treated in a way no athlete should ever be treated over a game. Both of those things are true. That is the whole point. Anybody who tells you this is a simple story about a good guy and a bad guy is either not paying attention or is counting on you not to. So what actually changed after that night? Alyssa Thomas served one game and paid a $1,000 fine. The league issued one statement, then a second one condemning the threats against her. Caitlin Clark missed one game of her own, nursing a back injury that nobody on the floor was punished for in real time, on a play that was not even the one everybody was arguing about. Stephanie White got her officiating grievance onto every sports show in the country, and then turned around and defended the very player she was furious at. And a whole lot of people online used a basketball scramble as an excuse to threaten a woman's life. Everything that mattered on paper got corrected. Almost nothing that mattered in practice got prevented. The whistle still came too late, if it came at all. The injury still happened. The threats still went out. And the two real questions underneath all of it are still sitting there unanswered. Is this league capable of protecting its players in real time instead of the morning after? And is it capable of protecting them from what its own audience does once the clip goes viral? Until somebody answers both of those, this exact story is going to keep repeating itself, with different names, over and over again. So I want to hear from you, and I want a real answer, not just a side. Forget who you were rooting for. What is the one thing this league should actually change to keep a night like this from happening again? Is it the officiating, the review process, or the way it protects players off the court? Tell me down in the comments. If this breakdown gave you the full picture instead of the half you got everywhere else, do me a favor and hit that like button, because it genuinely helps. Subscribe if you want the next investigation the day it drops. I read every comment, and I will see you in the next one.